As more of you are coming in, we are going to get started. There is a lot to cover tonight. We are literally going to go through the alphabet of SPRC, Staff Parish Relations Committee, or Pastor Parish Relations Committee, whatever nomenclature you use in your local congregation. We also have members who have a unified one board that are with us tonight that have responsibility for this type of work. So we're excited to be joined by two district superintendents tonight. Sarah Schlickert, who is the district superintendent of the Annapolis District and Greater Washington District in the Baltimore-Washington Conference, and Tina Blake, who is the district superintendent of the Lower Shore District and also the dean of the cabinet in the Peninsula Delaware Conference. And as usual, I am still Bill Brown, even though the voice may sound different tonight, the Director of Innovative Evangelism for the Baltimore-Washington Conference and resourcing the Peninsula Delaware Conference. And we are going to get started with a word of prayer. Then I'm going to give some instructions, and then we're going to just hand it over to our two presenters tonight. So if you all would bow your heads with me as we unite our hearts in prayer. Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks for gathering us together from around the state of Maryland and the state of Delaware, the District of Columbia, and parts of West Virginia, for uniting us in this Episcopal area so that we can be about the work of ministry of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And while we may think we are just sitting on a committee, we are actually involved in the ministry of administration as we support and encourage and provide resources for our pastoral leadership or our staff in a local church. So I give you thanks for gathering us together tonight for the wisdom and insight that Tina and Sarah will be bringing, and pray that your Spirit would give us open minds and open hearts to hear and receive and then to act upon what we learn. We ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So a couple of technical things. I see somebody's already got their hand raised. If you have a question, please use the Q&A. But I also want to let you know that we've opened up the chat. So if you want to open up the chat and select everyone and put in the chat your name and your church and which conference you're with, and that would just help us get an idea of the multitude of people who are joining us tonight. I'm also going to put in the chat, we have a handout tonight for you to follow. If you're on the phone, I know you can't access the chat easily. This handout will be posted with the recording later this week, so don't worry. You will be able to get access to it. So I see people are putting in their places. We have people from all over the Baltimore-Washington Conference and the Peninsula Delaware Conference. That is wonderful. So if you have a question tonight, please use the Q&A, because there are so many of you, I can't keep track of the questions in the chat. But without further ado, using all my big words today, I want to welcome Tina and Sarah. Thank you so much for taking time to join us tonight as we delve into this important topic.
It is a pleasure to be here tonight. I'm just going to preface by saying that both Sarah and I have been told that we are fast talkers, that we talk at a rapid rate. And so we just want to assure you that if you miss any letter of the alphabet during our presentation, we'll redo it. We'll re-go over it at the end if you just put the question in the Q&A. So I'm going to start with the letter A. And so the letter A is affirm. And as the SPRC, you affirm the performance of the staff and the pastor. It's your role to not only receive and relay complaints, but also to relay affirmations to the pastor. And so it's both end. It's relaying affirmations and relaying complaints. Number B, the letter B is bridge. You are the bridge between the pastor and the congregation. You are to help people communicate in healthy ways, keeping with the guidance of Matthew 18, chapter 18, verses 15 through 17. C is confidentiality. All SPRC meetings are closed meetings. And let me say that again. All SPRC meetings are closed meetings, and all information inside these meetings is to be held in confidence. It should not be leaked out to the general public what has transpired inside the meetings. Any need for public statements or sharing should be discussed by the committee and communicated by or through the chair or a designated person. The SPRC is not to meet without the approval and or presence of the pastor or that of the district superintendent. If a church is operating with a unified board, the portion of their meetings and work covering the SPRC topic should be held as a closed meeting, generally at the end of the general meeting, and 2 minutes held separately from the rest of those for the meetings. In other words, you should have a separate set of minutes for the closed SPRC meetings, separate and apart from the general unified board minutes. Turn things over to Sarah.
Thank you, Tina. Well, I'm excited to be with Tina this evening and to be with all of you. So the work of the SPRC is very personal for me. I have lived under the authority of an SPRC every day of my life. My father was a student pastor when I was born, and I was a pastor's kid. And so the work that we're discussing truly does impact lots of people. And so I'm honored to be with you all this evening. Continuing with the alphabet, D, deliver. The SPRC is tasked with delivering all pertinent information to the pastor. Though again, as we shared earlier, it's not the SPRC's job to share every concern they hear. The SPRC should be encouraging and supporting members, staff, and clergy to address disagreements appropriately and to resist being triangulated between persons. So as Tina mentioned, Matthew 18:15 through 17 earlier, Jesus lays out what to do if someone sins against you. First, go to the person. If that doesn't work, take somebody with you. And if that doesn't work, bring them before the group. And so we really want to be encouraging persons when they have concerns to be able to ask them first, have you spoken to them? And how did that go? If a person doesn't feel comfortable, it would be appropriate for a member of the SPRC to go with them. But again, to be encouraging communication, you get triangulated when you get involved in somebody else's relationship, right? So that's the triangle. So you're in the triangle and 2 other people are in the triangle. When 2 other people get you involved in what's going on between them, that's getting triangulated. There are times when the SPRC absolutely needs to get involved. And as we'll talk about in other points, the district superintendent or other resources need to be involved. But that should not be the first step if somebody has a concern. E, evaluate. The SPRC is tasked with evaluating all staff members. This might be done by the SPRC directly by completing all staff evaluations, or it could be developing and overseeing a process through which staff evaluations are completed by appropriate supervisors. This sometimes depends on the size of a staff. But the entire evaluation process needs to be laid out and overseen by the SPRC or PPRC. And your district superintendent can help talk about and share more about best practices if you have any questions this evening. Clergy evaluations are done through the annual conference. In the Peninsula Delaware Conference, evaluations along with advisories are due November 1st. And in the Baltimore-Washington Conference, they're due December 1st. It's important for the SPRC to honor those processes and deadlines, but also to have a process for evaluating staff as well. It's important when you do those evaluations to make sure that you are not only checking boxes that are appropriate, but you are giving descriptive and specific examples, both if there are areas of concern, but also if things are going well. It is very, very difficult for somebody to know how to improve or to continue doing what they're doing well with just a general statement. And so an example of that might be if there were a concern that a church might have of a pastor or a staff person failing to complete administrative tasks in a timely manner. Okay, that would be it's general. You might give a specific example of 2 months ago when there were church conference forms that were due. Those things were not completed by the agreed upon timeline, right? So that's a specific example. So as you're doing evaluations, it is important to add the information that will help the person, and in the case of clergy, will help the district superintendent understand what the SPRC is laying out. And then F, the SPRC must meet at least quarterly. The Book of Discipline says that the Staff Parish Relations Committee must be meeting at least quarterly. And best practice is to meet, certainly with a new pastor, at least monthly. When I started, one of the very first sessions of the Training Tuesday that I was able to lead early on when I started as a district superintendent was with one of our colleagues in the Peninsula Delaware Conference, Reverend Joe Archie, who has rotated off the cabinet. But one of the guidance that really stuck with me as a new DS was he shared that when he was called into churches to deal with conflict, the first question that he would ask was when the SPRC had last met and how frequently they met. And it was almost a rule that applied in situations where there were significant concerns that the SPRC was not meeting regularly. And so being proactive as the SPRC and having those regular meetings is very important.
Amen. We are people of grace. And so the SPRC handles all matters in a way which reflect the grace of God, the grace that God has given to each one of us, and our call to show that same grace and love to others. And so everything that we do should be handled in a graceful manner. H is hire. The SPRC is the body in the church that is tasked with hiring staff. They have the ultimate authority over the hiring and firing of staff, though they may designate working teams or specific processes to guide these tasks. While it is your task to do the hiring and firing, you may set up teams of folks that may not be on the SPRC. You may pull in other staff members or pull in other folks that might be instrumental in helping you make decisions about hiring. But ultimately, the hiring and firing fall under your area. Neither the pastor nor any other staff or committee may hire staff without the SPRC's authorization. So it is your job to ensure that employees are hired, and in cases where things haven't worked out, it is your job to help them find a new occupation. I is for identify. It's your job to work with the pastor to identify goals each and every year. That's what part of the covenant is for. The covenant that you work through together. You work through a covenant that specifies the goals that you would like to see the pastor work on in the coming year, and then to check on the status of how the pastor is progressing with those goals. It's not the time of the evaluation to then look at how the pastor did over the year, but in your quarterly meetings, how are you doing with the goals that we have set? And it's your job also, if the pastor is struggling to meeting any of those goals, to strategize and come up with areas where you can be of help to help the pastor achieve those goals. And you also work with the pastor to determine action steps, again, to achieve these identified goals or to address any areas of concern. So again, if there is a problem with meeting the goals, it is your job to sit with the pastor and work out a plan for how the pastor can meet these goals and how some of the problem areas can be overcome.
The next letter is J. And for J, we say that the SPRC acts in a just manner when handling difficult situations. This includes listening to all involved parties without bias and prayerfully and wisely discerning a path forward through various situations. The SPRC is encouraged to reach out to the district superintendent for assistance when challenging situations arise, for guidance in making both just and gracious decisions. Please don't wait until a situation has reached a crisis level before reaching out to the district superintendent. Often, a district superintendent can help the SPRC chair talk through what might be some options. It does not mean reaching out to the district superintendent does not mean that the district superintendent is going to insert themselves into your next meeting. Often they can be a resource to bounce ideas off of or concerns, and even to make them aware of situations. Both clergy and SPRC chairs are encouraged to reach out to the district superintendent when they know that there's an area of concern, and to not let the DS hear it from someone else. So if there's a situation that's challenging, make the district superintendent aware. And if you need assistance, especially trying to balance the complexities of the system. Some of you maybe have heard of the family systems theory and training. We have excellent training from our Center for Clergy Excellence around family systems theory. And those relationships in a church can be complicated. And so turning to the district superintendent, and sometimes they may feel the need and be able to bring in resources around conflict resolution, additional tools to help. So make sure that you're reaching out to the district superintendent to work justly through situations. K, knowledgeable. The SPRC chair and members make every effort to be knowledgeable on topics over which they have authority, including pastoral compensation levels and policies, tax matters, HR best practices, and how to resolve conflicts in healthy and Christian ways. You may not always have people on the SPRC who are experts in human resources, and there's a very good chance that you're not going to have somebody on the SPRC who's an expert in clergy compensation or taxes. Clergy taxes are a whole other. You don't have to be experts, but having a working knowledge as you're looking at items like compensation is very helpful. So it is important to have a learning mindset, a growth mindset, to be able to learn, to understand, both when working with clergy, but also when you have staff, to understand basic legal and regulatory practices, and also to know what you don't know. Part of being knowledgeable is recognizing where the knowledge and experience of your SPRC has reached its limit and when you need to reach out, whether to the district superintendent or to other particular experts in hiring or, again, in any of these issues. But we certainly expect that the SPRC will be knowledgeable and will find those resources when they don't have it and need it. And then L, the SPRC handles all matters in love. An excellent summary of what love looks like can be found in 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul describes how the Christian community is called to treat each other. Now, we are, many of us, most familiar with 1 Corinthians 13 from weddings, where it is very rare, in fact, at a Christian wedding to not hear some portion of 1 Corinthians 13. Starting at verse 4, love is patient, love is kind, it is not envious or boastful or rude or arrogant. And the Apostle Paul, though, wrote that not for married couples, but for the Christian community. He was writing to a church in Corinth that was struggling with getting along with each other. And so 1 Corinthians 13 is an excellent guide for the work of the SPRC, not only within the SPRC, but the ways that you seek to work with and encourage the relationships amongst all of those in the congregation, the clergy, the members of the congregation, the leaders in the congregation. And so turning to 1 Corinthians 13, if you're kind of stuck and you're trying to work through a situation involving different dynamics between people, turning to 1 Corinthians 13 and asking, in what ways are those involved in this situation reflecting what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 13? That is often a very good guide for how to encourage relationships in Christian love.
Amen. And sometimes, as a member of the SPRC, you will be called in to mediate difficult situations. Sometimes between the pastor and another member on the SPRC. It could be between the pastor and the congregation, someone from the congregation. It could be between another staff member and someone from the congregation, or another staff member and the pastor. But it is your job to be the mediator between the individual congregants and the pastor or staff person. Sometimes the pastor will act as the mediator if it's a staff person, but sometimes it may be members of the SPRC. That's particular to how your particular church structure would be set up. But if there are concerns, again, we're going to encourage you to follow Matthew 18, chapter 15, verse 17. The first question you should always ask when receiving a complaint or a concern is, have you talked to the person directly? Sometimes people are simply afraid to talk to particularly the pastor directly. So you can you can invite yourself to, offer to go with them. You don't have to do anything but just be a presence with them as they address their concern with the person, the pastor or the staff person or whoever they have the concern with. It's only when that has broken down, that first conversation was not come to a satisfactory conclusion for one of the parties, that then you would step in and act as a real mediator. You would try to mediate between the two, is when that initial conversation between the two folks with the concern has fallen apart. And then you would come in and you would mediate that. And you would mediate that in love, basically. You listen to both sides, try to be objective to both sides, help each person to speak to the other person in a way that that they can hear each other. And then if that has broken down, then I would suggest that then you would call in the district superintendent. Only after you have failed as a committee to mediate that situation would you then ask for the district superintendent to either offer advice or to step in and try to act as a further, more formal mediator. But oftentimes you will find that if you don't allow yourself to be the complaint department, and that your first question is, have you talked to this person? The level of the amount of concerns that you receive lessen, because as folks are encouraged to be accountable for their own concerns, things are often resolved in that initial conversation. The second is never. Members of the same family living in the same household may not serve together on the SPRC. That is disciplinary. Our Book of Discipline says that if you are related by blood in some way, shape, or form, or by marriage, and you're living in the same household, you cannot both serve on the SPRC committee. So more specifically, spouses and parents and children living in the same household should not serve overlapping terms. If such persons are by other positions, such as lay member to the annual conference, serving at the same time, a formal policy to have one person recuse themselves from the SPRC is one way to remedy the situation until the positions can be formally adjusted. And this is just so that one family cannot control the church or control the pastor or so that we have a diverse committee where all the voices of the congregation are being heard, and one family is not monopolizing the direction of the church with the pastor. Do I have one more? Yes, I do. Official. The chair of the SPRC is the official spokesperson for the committee. So any letters coming to the district superintendent or to the bishop regarding a clergy person should come from the chairperson of the committee. That doesn't mean that the chairperson can write on their own behalf as chairperson without the committee's knowledge. It should be the chairperson writing on behalf of the committee. And because the work of the SPRC is confidential, no member of the committee or the pastor should report out or answer questions about the work of the SPRC. These are closed meetings. All of the conversation are held in confidence unless otherwise agreed upon by every person in the committee.
The next letter is P, and for P, personnel. The SPRC acts as the personnel committee of the church, and as such has responsibility to make sure the basic personnel function of the church are completed, such as employment paperwork, evaluations and reviews, determination of compensation and benefits, job descriptions, hiring processes, etc. The SPRC will often have to work on these pieces in cooperation with other committees, especially the Finance Committee. And so you all have just come through or are coming through a season where you've had to work on pastor compensation. And hopefully that process has included the SPRC in conversation with the Finance Committee, and then moving into conversation with the council. If you have a unified board structure, you got to have all of those conversations in one place. And so it is important for the SPRC to be looking at all of the pieces that are relevant to compensation, but also things like employment paperwork. That doesn't mean that the SPRC need to be the one processing employment paperwork. If you have a bookkeeper, whoever handles that, but you need to make sure that that gets done. The SPRC has responsibility for that. Background checks, as you know, in whatever ways they're part of your safe sanctuaries policies for in general, and also in particular for staff. There was, I saw in the Q&A, I'll mention it here because I think that there was a question about where to find information about clergy taxes. So the first thing that I will say is the IRS has some really helpful websites at pages that you can turn to. Your district superintendent can often answer questions. As a district superintendent, I often get the same questions. There's like 5 questions that I get about clergy taxes or that come up. So the DS can often pretty quickly answer questions. Your clergy person, some clergy are more or less familiar with clergy taxes. The IRS, over the years that I have been in ministry, has offered a few options for how clergy taxes are handled that were not the case when I started. So things like how self-employment taxes are handled. And so each situation is a little bit different because options are given to the church around and the pastor about how things are withheld and how things are paid. So your district superintendent can be, so on the issue of things like that, your district superintendent, the accountant that works with the church, those are some of the resources that can help answer some questions, but there are some helpful official pages, for example, for the IRS that will talk about taxes in general for employees, as well as in the case of clergy who are under IRS regulations considered self-employed. Q questions. The SPRC receives questions from the congregation that relate to the role of the pastor and staff, the appointment process, and other related topics. Answers to such questions should be given only after a formal determination, consensus, or guidance from the SPRC, and support for answering questions on some topics, such as the appointment process, can also be received from the district superintendent. You may have questions generally about how the appointment process works. If your church knows that you're going to be receiving a new pastor, maybe your pastor's retiring or your pastor's been appointed out, the district superintendent has probably already had and is in the process of having conversations with you that will include explaining to you how that process works. We have a wonderful document that Bishop Easterling has provided, the point of appointments, that talks about that some. But make sure that when folks ask questions, that you are giving the most correct information, that you are answering questions that you have the answer to, and that you're reaching out for more information when you don't know the answer. And if there are specific things happening in the church, like let's say you are trying to fill a staff position and people are asking, how's that going? It is a best practice in the SPRC to agree, as we shared earlier, about what official statements are going to be, to determine how you're going to answer questions that you can't anticipate, right? If something's going on, you're like, people are going to ask this question, we're already getting this question, then as an SPRC, it is good to just refresh the reminder of who can speak for the SPRC and what to do when folks come with questions, because you will get lots of different kinds of questions. And then R recommends. Each year, the SPRC recommends whether or not the pastor should be reappointed for the following conference year. These recommendations, called advisories, are due towards the end of the calendar year. And in both conferences, they're due with evaluations. So November 1st for Peninsula Delaware, December 1st for Baltimore-Washington. And these advisories guide the work of the bishop and cabinet in making appointments that begin the following July 1st. And so please take these very seriously. We look at them. We review both SPRCs and clergy fill out advisories, and district superintendents. We review these as part of our work preparing for appointment work. So please, take this very seriously. And if you have questions, if you're like, maybe you're struggling with what to put on the advisory, please reach out to your district superintendent and they can help answer questions and maybe give some suggestions for working through if you're struggling with how to fill out an advisory.
Very good. So the SPRC supports You support the pastor and the staff in both formal and informal ways. This month has been Pastor Appreciation Month, the whole month of October. So there's still time if you haven't shown your pastor some appreciation this month. There's Administrative Professional Day, which is Wednesday of the last full week of April, and other special days as like the birthdays of your pastor, your staff members. Support also includes making sure that the staff and their family are the staff and the pastor, the staff are taking their vacations, they're taking their day off. It's very important. Most of the time when the pastors are burning out, it's because they're not taking their vacation and they're not taking their day off. So it is your job as the SPRC to ensure that they're taking the full weeks of vacation that they get, and they're taking at least one day off a week for Sabbath. Finally, the SPRC also allow for, you would set sick and vacation days for staff that aren't pastors. Pastors' vacations are set by the conference, but individual staff members' vacations, I believe in Baltimore-Washington is the same. Does the conference set? Yeah. So I want to make sure I'm saying the same thing for both conferences, because we're one area. So we're trying to be as similar as we can be. But you would, for staff members that aren't pastors, the SPRC would decide with the administrative council the appropriate. You would recommend the appropriate numbers of vacation and sick days when you're in the hiring process. That would all be part of the contract that you would prepare for the staff member. But also professional and personal days, and all of that would be included in the package that you're putting together. And you would seek to support them in gracious and appropriate ways throughout the year. Positive feedback goes a long way. Oftentimes, as you know, we remember the bad stuff that people say about us a lot more than the good stuff. And the good usually always outweighs the bad. So supporting your pastor and your staff by encouragement and a good word of encouragement and affirmations of the job they're doing will go a long way to ensuring that they feel loved and valued and supported in your church family. Second is trust, for T. And the SPRC works with the pastor and the staff to build a relationship of trust. This includes maintaining confidentiality, reaching out to the DS when appropriate, in a situation that goes beyond your skills and your capacity to handle, and you feel you need some further assistance from the district superintendent. But trust begins with relationship, and a relationship of confidentiality, prayer, and support is one way to build that trust. Unity, for you, it's your job to work with the pastor to promote a spirit of unity and cooperation within the congregation and between the clergy, staff, and congregation. While unity does not require that we are always in agreement, it does require that all disagreements are handled graciously, respectfully, and in ways that build up each other and their shared ministry. Unity does not always mean that we all agree with each other. It doesn't mean unanimity, however you say that word, but I can't say it tonight, but it doesn't mean that. But it does mean that we treat each other with love and respect.
Sarah, you are now the vigilant. The work of the SPRC is vitally important to the clergy, staff, and congregation, and it is important that the committee remains vigilant in the work before them, never failing to meet regularly, to continue learning in areas that they oversee, and reaching out to the district superintendent and other appropriate experts in areas which are beyond the committee members' experience and knowledge. But vigilance. Friends, if you are not meeting regularly, stuff's gonna happen. It will. I promise you it will. Even if things are going really smooth right now, think about the relationships in your life. In order for them to stay healthy, you have to tend to them, right? There's like relationship hygiene, okay? That you think about the ways that you care for your teeth. If you just said, my teeth are great, I went to the dentist and I have no cavities, and you just let it go and you didn't care for the regular day in, day out maintenance of your teeth, you would eventually have problems that could have been prevented by good hygiene. And so the relationship hygiene of the SPRC is being vigilant and making sure that you're meeting, and that if there are concerns that come up, that you can have conversation about them, that you can address them before they become big. Almost many, I'm not going to say almost all, many situations that become big could have been worked through if the committee was meeting regularly. If you're waiting for there to be a problem to say, oh, we should schedule an SPRC meeting, by the time you've gotten to that point, you have missed multiple opportunities likely to have been able to work through whatever the situation is. So remaining vigilant is making sure that you are staying on top of the regular functioning of the SPRC and not waiting for problems to balloon. Sometimes they will pop up and they will get very big very quickly. Sometimes that happens. But often, when we are not vigilant and attentive to the responsibility given to us in the work of the SPRC, is when things can really exceed our capacity to handle them. W, window. The SPRC provides a window into the congregation for the pastor. While the SPRC meetings they're not merely opportunities to unload a list of grievances or things that quote unquote everyone is saying. The SPRC does need to help the pastors to have an accurate sense of the mood, sense, concerns, and affirmations of the congregation. Clergy and staff should not, as a general rule, and Tina has mentioned this earlier tonight, clergy and staff should not be surprised in feedback that is given during their annual reviews, but rather this should be part of ongoing conversations with the SPRC and supervisors around areas of concern as well as areas of excellence. This is an absolute best practice with anybody doing evaluations in any workplace, is that an annual evaluation should not be the time that somebody finds out something that they've been doing wrong for 12 months. Because we're not trying to catch people in the evaluation is not meant to be a scorecard. It's meant to improve performance, right? And if all we look at is the time to say, now we're really going to say all the stuff that we haven't said, you've missed the opportunity in all of the time before that to work together to move forward in healthy and fruitful ways. And that's what we want. We want our congregations to be vital and fruitful in ministry and for folks to be healthy individually and in their relationships. And so in order to do that, addressing situations as they're first starting to arise, that's important. And so the SPRC being a window to help make sure the pastor might not have blind spots. And sometimes the SPRC then to help the district superintendent to identify where there are some blind spots, to help the district superintendent understand maybe what's going on in the congregation, including the range of things, right? To say, here's what we're seeing and here's what we're hearing. But again, following all the other things that we've talked about, not to just be a litany of here's what's going wrong, to encourage folks to follow the guidance of Matthew 18. Because the other thing is, it becomes really miserable to be on the SPRC when you show up on Sunday morning and people think that your job is simply to hear them complain. That is the fastest way to burn out an SPRC and an SPRC chair. And so we really don't want to play into any sort of behavior. We don't want to understand being a window as being a trash can for everything that people are upset about. We want to encourage folks to be able to address those in healthy ways. And then X, excellence. And we know it starts with E, but the next letter is X. So excellence. The SPRC expects excellence from the pastor and staff and works to provide the best possible support, working conditions, and compensation to support excellent ministry. Areas of excellence are affirmed regularly and specifically. We mentioned that already. And areas of growth are also identified, also with specific examples. And together, steps to improve performance are identified and agreed upon. This is often done as part of the formal evaluation and goal setting. But again, it should be part of the regular work of the SPRC with the clergy and staff. And part of that, was in the S for support, is wanting to make sure that we're providing the best possible support for people to perform with excellence. And so we have responsibility as employers, right? And as supervisors to be aware of what appropriate compensation is when you're setting compensation levels for staff, to do some research and find out for comparable positions in your area. What are other people paying? To not, to have reasonable expectations, certainly meeting every regulation that applies to different employment statuses to make sure that you're meeting all of the rules that apply, but also to understand that if we want to get the best out of people, then we need to give them the best support and environments in which to do that.
We've talked a lot about the yearly evaluations. Why is yearly? You complete a yearly evaluation. You complete the yearly advisory forms. They're due November 1st in Peninsula, Delaware, December 1st in Baltimore-Washington. I encourage you, there was a question in the question and answer about how frequently meetings should be. Sarah said at the beginning that the discipline says quarterly, that the SPRC should be meeting quarterly. We suggest monthly with the new pastor until you get a rhythm and the pastor is nicely transitioned into your church. Part of how to do a yearly evaluation easily is to write a covenant together at the beginning, stating goals for the year, but also how you're going to operate as a committee, what rules you're going to follow in terms of how you're going to behave in the committee towards each other. And it's nice to have a scripture passage to focus on. And if you're reviewing that covenant that you've written together at the beginning at every meeting, then when it comes time for the yearly evaluation, it should be a very simple task to do, because this is something you've addressed regularly at each of your meetings, all of the areas that you've asked the pastor to focus on. I found it helpful when I was pastoring to have monthly conversations with the SPRC chair, just to check in. How are things going? How do you feel things are going? Have you heard anything that I need to be aware of? I always ask the question, is there anything I'm doing that you wish I wasn't doing? And is there something I'm not doing that you wish I was? And so I had those monthly conversations but by the time it came time to do my yearly evaluation, there was never anything that was a surprise, because we had full transparency the whole year at our meetings and through the phone calls with the SPRC chair. Lastly is zero. There is zero tolerance for there to be disrespect on behalf of or directed towards the pastor, staff, or congregation. That includes by SPRC members. Everything should be handled with dignity and respect. All persons are expected to conduct themselves in mature, gracious, and Christ-like ways. When this is a struggle, the district superintendent can provide specific supports when you're struggling to work together. It is part of our job to help mediate and help you have a successful relationship with your pastor and a fruitful relationship, but that we want both the SPRC, the church, and the pastor to have a fruitful relationship. And so we can provide direct support, indirect support, conflict mediation, or just simple guidance in ways that are necessary. But we are here to help you to have the best relationship possible so that you can have vital ministry and have healthy relationships between all parties. And so we did that pretty quickly. In 42 minutes, we went through the whole alphabet.
People have stuck with you, so that's awesome. We didn't see all these, nobody's dropping off. They've gotten the handout. If you were not able to download the handout, it will be posted with the recording. You can go back and watch it. Better yet, you can show it to your entire SPRC and walk through the alphabet together. Thank you all. We do have a number of questions that have come in. First and foremost, Tina, after the letter S with support, somebody has put in that they struggle pronouncing unanimity also. So they wanted to support you in the chat that they have a struggle with that word as well. So I'm going to just roll through, and some of these I'm going to group together, but we'll just start at the top. In churches where there are strong family ties, How do you manage conflicts of interest?
Tina, I'll let you take that one.
Yes. Gracefully, carefully. So where there is a conflict of interest, and we would generally ask one person to step aside and not be a part of the conversation in terms of SPRC conversations. If there's like two family members, like we discussed, like the lay member to annual conference is married or living in the same household with someone on the SPRC, we would ask one of them to recuse themselves during the SPRC situations. In terms of conflicts, like within, because often we have family members in churches that aren't living together, but they share DNA. And if the conflict is that, it is, again, gracefully and following that Matthew scripture, encouraging folks to talk to each other, but to do so respectfully, and allowing for folks to hear you, but also for you to hear them in a way that is respectful, loving, kind, and Christ-like. And so if a family situation becomes out of control, then we would have to take some more formal steps to mediate that. But generally, we'd follow the same procedures as we would for any other situation with conflict.
Thank you. If a pastor uses an independent contractor for special projects and the contractor is submitting invoices for the work, should the SPRC have oversight over that person?
So I'm curious to see Tina's response. This is a very specific situation. And so my first thought is, if I was this church's district superintendent, I would want to know more about the situation. There should be transparency in all financial expenditures at a church. I can think of examples of contractors that were not directly overseen by the SPRC at churches that I have served. I think most common example of a contractor at a church that wouldn't necessarily fall under the SPRC or have it in churches that I've served has been a cleaning company. So often, like, the trustees would, so it would, I think that it would depend on the situation, but there should be transparency and there should be an established budget. I could imagine that there might be situations that perhaps the pastor has, is delegated to the pastor to have authority for a particular task, but it would really depend, and there shouldn't be an expenditure that removes the SPRC's oversight. The SPRC primarily oversees staff and pastor. And so again, it would, to me, really depend on the contractor. And so my question would be, how much of a situation like that is specifically SPRC versus a finance question of who has authority to authorize expenditures and how that's handled. So it would depend. Tina, you're
Yeah, I would also include the trustees if it was building related. But I mean, they're all kind of, again, just not having the full information from the question makes it difficult to answer in a way that might be fully what you're looking for. But there are things that we have to take into consideration when hiring anybody outside of the church. And that is, are our safe sanctuary policies being followed? Are there children around when this contractor is around, and have they been background checked and have all the proper insurances? And I mean, there's all kinds of things that need to be considered when hiring anyone to do work at a church. And so I would want to know that all of those bases were covered. But as a pastor, I just never did anything as a pastor without going through my administrative board and the SPRC. I just didn't. I think the more folks on board with whatever you're doing, the better it turns out. And so I would just want to know more about that before I gave you anything real definitive. But I would want to make sure that the appropriate entities within the church were handling their area of interest.
I'm going to ask our participants. You're asking some wonderful questions in the chat, but so many of you are in the chat that I can't keep track of the questions. So please put them in the Q&A. We have an agenda question. Do you have any recommendations for the agenda for a regular SPRC meeting? Is there a template available? Does the denomination provide anything?
So I think that something that might help with that, and then there's another question about a guide for new SPR or rookie SPRC chairs, is that our United Methodist publishing resources do provide published guidelines. These are booklets. I think they're digital now for all of the committees of a local church. And there is an SPRC guideline that goes over some of that can help a new SPRC chair or member to know what they should be doing, and can also help to guide agendas. We also, in the Baltimore-Washington conference, I don't know if Peninsula Delaware has something similar, but at the time, especially of a new appointment, there's usually like a calendar that our district administrators send out that says these things should be happening in these quarters. Like, here's when evaluation should be being done. Here's when you should be working on clergy compensation. And so those are items throughout the course of a year. And you could probably figure those out yourselves too. That should be part of an agenda. So again, between any guidance like that from your district office, as well as the guidelines from booklet, there's like a whole set. You can get a whole set. And
I put the link for that in the chat.
Great. And so those are good resources.
So in terms of, I mean, even I know the rookie chair, they're asking. And two people have asked about some evaluation process training for rookie chairs, or there was another one. Are there examples of staff evaluations available? And then finally, how do you evaluate a brand new pastor who just started in July when they're just getting to know each other?
So on my district, I offered an evaluation training by Zoom to SPRCs and pastors to take. So that was available on the Lower Shore District. In terms of a brand new pastor, I would say that you do the best you can to evaluate what you've done so far. Certainly you can't evaluate them fully because they've only been 6 months at the most with you. I would just maybe evaluate the transition, how things have gone so far, how they have adapted into your setting and the goals that you have set, and maybe write a narrative along with the actual evaluation itself, just describing what your first 6 months have been like for the district superintendent, rather than to try to evaluate them on goals that probably have just been because it takes a few months to set the goals with a new pastor. So I would write a narrative along with that, just to say, this is a new pastor, this is what we've seen, this is what we're working on, just so that the district superintendent has an idea about how the transition is going and what goals you are looking to set in place for the pastor for the coming year. That would be my suggestion. I don't know, Sarah might have some more to add to that.
Yeah, I would just say we know the pastor just got there. So, I mean, the district superintendent, so I guess I'm so glad that people take the evaluation seriously. Please know that we understand the pastor just started. So do the best you can. I mean, I think, and know that, we understand.
I'm going to just insert, because I've been at this for a while. So my daughter just started a new job, and she had a 6-month evaluation just to see, how was your first 6 months with this company, with this location been? So they weren't doing a whole year long, just for the amount of time they've been there.
Bill, I think I can knock out 3 of these questions as disciplinary questions. I think we can do them quick. I've got the paragraph open on my computer.
Perfect. Hit it.
Okay, so the paragraph in the Book of Discipline that speaks to membership and the functioning of the Staff Parish Relations Committee is paragraph 258.2 in the 2016 Book of Discipline. We'll be getting a new book of discipline January 1st. It's going to be the 2020-2024. It'll be fun. It'll have both years on it. So
A collector's item.
well, yeah, it will be a collector's item. So we always say that. So the paragraph number may change, but 258.2. And so that's where it speaks about membership. And minimum membership at point A under that paragraph, it says that the committee shall be composed of not fewer than 5 nor more than 9 persons. It talks about other membership. No staff member or immediate family member of the pastor or staff can be on it. Only one person from an immediate family residing in the same household shall serve on the committee. So that's the paragraph you want to look to about membership. And the question about couples who are dating. Does the Book of Discipline prohibit a couple that is dating from both serving out in the SPRC? It does not. But we have the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, right? And so there's certainly, I understand that some churches, it's hard to meet the requirements of the SPRC in terms of membership. That has been, in some of the churches that I work with, one of the reasons why they have not moved to a unified board structure. Because a unified board, because it functions as the SPRC, has to meet as one of the committees it functions as, right? So a unified board functions as all of the administrative committees, so finance, trustees, SPRC, and council. And some churches just can't, they can't make that work, or they can't get the right people on. And so a unified board, yes, does generally, as one of the administrative committees, serve as the SPRC, and as I think Tina shared earlier in our time together, but there need to be very clear boundaries in that unified board, in the meetings, in the minutes, in the way they function. There need to be very clear delineations of when the committee is functioning as the SPRC. The SPRC work shouldn't be interspersed between the council in the council meeting, right? So if you've got a unified board, generally what folks do is they do that SPRC work at the end and they close the meeting. If there's other folks that aren't members of the committee, they need to leave. The minutes are kept separately. Those are some of the ways that, the unified board would function as the SPRC. And I think, did I touch, I think those were 3 questions, Bill, did I? Okay.
You did. You got them all. When in doubt, look at the BOD. Tina, you mentioned you had monthly conversations with the SPRC chair, and somebody's asked, how are those documented? Or are they documented?
I did not document them. It was just a habit, a regular, starting just to build a relationship with the SPRC chair, and because I cared about doing a good job. And so I wanted to know, how I was being received and where they would where the growing edges were, so that I could be working on them constantly. And so I had a very open and honest conversations with the SPRC chair on a monthly basis. Just those questions. They're really informal. Those questions I said to you, how are things going? Are you hearing any? I would always say, are you hearing anything from the peanut gallery that I need to be aware of? And then I would say, is there anything I'm doing that you wish I wasn't doing? Is there anything I'm not doing that you wish I was? And that was the gist of the conversation. It was short. It wasn't lengthy. But I always just did a check-in monthly with the SPRC chair. It wasn't a formal documented conversation. It was just something a practice that I had as a pastor, that I did at all of my appointments. And it worked well for me. And I think it would work.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
We had a question about staff serving on other committees, particularly can a custodian hired by the church, also serve as the trustee's chair?
So by the Book of Discipline, they could. The Book of Discipline specifically outlines that actually a portion of the trustees don't even have to be members. I think it's a quarter or a third. That doesn't mean that churches want to do that. And that allowance was added for some very specific situations. I think for churches that's not a common thing. a church staff member could never serve on the SPRC. Would the Book of Discipline allow them to serve in that role? They could. That doesn't mean that that would be something the church would want to do. I think we could identify reasons why that might not be a good idea, but the Book of Discipline doesn't prohibit that.
Thank you. Here's an interesting question. So we have a participant who has served on the SPRC for a few years. They weren't aware that the committee makes a recommendation about the advisory for the pastor's appointment. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more? And should the chair be engaging the committee members in making that recommendation?
So the committee is the bridge between the congregation and the pastor. And so at the end of any year, like November for Peninsula Delaware, December for Baltimore-Washington, you, as the committee, you will know whether or not your congregation is is satisfied with their pastor or wanting a new pastor. And that, particularly if your congregation wants a new pastor, they will have made that very clear to you as the SPRC. It's not a secret. And so you, as a committee, you meet and you make the decision as a committee on behalf of the church, what the recommendation that you're going to make to the bishop regarding the appointment. I don't know what Baltimore-Washington's advisories look like. Ours have 3 boxes. We would like the bishop to keep our pastor in this appointment. We'd like to keep our pastor. The second box is we would like to keep our pastor under the following conditions. And then they would list a plan for, we're willing to keep our pastor, but we want to see these things happen. And the third is we would like to meet with our district superintendent, and we would like our bishop to consider a new appointment for our church. And so those are the 3 boxes in Peninsula Delaware. Sarah can talk about what Baltimore.
Little different in Baltimore-Washington, but basically that on that form is where you would indicate. And I will also say, just like evaluation, should it be a surprise? It shouldn't be a surprise to your district superintendent if you're going to, especially on your advisory, ask for your pastor to move. If you haven't said anything to the DS all year, and all of a sudden they get an advisory that you're asking that the pastor move, like, there should have been conversation, because there's obviously been something going on. So in the same way that we don't want that, best practice is that we don't want evaluations to be a surprise for folks. If you're having concerns that would lead to the SPRC to ask for a move, you should be talking with the district superintendent. It doesn't mean we're not going to take seriously if you fill that out, but that would be a reason to be having conversation much earlier with the district superintendent.
And on the forms for Peninsula Delaware, the pastor signs the SPRC's advisory form. So it's not a surprise to the pastor because you're transparent about that. And that's often difficult for a congregation to tell the pastor that we're asking for a new appointment. But if you've had the conversations again all throughout the year, it should not be a surprise to the pastor that it's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Jumping between 2 different areas now. If a church is in a transition and they have not been assigned a pastor yet, there have been some the question is, I have been called in to step in to help out, which is a problem. Where else can they go to questions? Where else can the congregation go for questions if they don't have a pastor yet? District
superintendent. When there's not a pastor appointed, the district superintendent is the pastor of record. And what that looks like, we have more than one church right now across our conferences that doesn't have a pastor. And so, churches are kind of in different places, but the answer to that is the district superintendent.
Back to the advisory. Someone is just curious, can a pastor request to move?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And the pastor also has an advisory form. In Peninsula Delaware, the pastor does not have to show their advisory form to the SPRC, but we encourage that they do. We encourage that the pastor be transparent, but they're not required. You don't have to sign theirs, but they have to sign yours.
Mm-hmm. It's the same in Baltimore-Washington. So.
Now, in terms of professional reimbursement budget for clergy. Are there any guidelines about what items are permitted or not permitted to be used?
Yes,
Funds can be
and
used.
because the IRS determines that. So that is not because if the pastor were to try to use those funds for things that are not permitted under IRS guidelines, the pastor could be liable for taxes under that. So that's something like the conferences don't necessarily even have control. Like the conference can't authorize those funds to be used for something that the IRS wouldn't allow. But it's good to have conversation. I mean, there should be conversation with the SPRC. Sometimes there are specific concerns that arise around, can a pastor use their funds for this continuing education or for this? Transparency, just have conversation around those. To be honest, in some churches that I have served, spending out of the professional reimbursements is also a cash flow issue. So in the Baltimore-Washington conference, we have a standard minimum reimbursement amount that's $4,100. And in some churches, if the pastor tried to spend all of that in January, the church might not be able to. So just having conversation around how that's handled. So I have been at churches where, for cash flow reasons, because again, that should be budgeted and it should be able to be provided in the course of the year. But for cash flow reasons, as part of standing policies for everybody, any expense above a certain amount had to be approved. And that applied to me too as a pastor. Anyway, so I think there's some discussions about like what's included and others about cash flow. Those are different, but that's covered under IRS guidelines as to what can be covered in those.
Back to membership, and we have a lot of churches that are moving to this unified or the single board model. How do you do the SPR membership on the single board, particularly, let's say there's just 5 or 6 people on the board? How is SPRC taken care of?
I think that's contextual to church. Some unified boards are larger than others, and they're able to designate certain people to do the work of the SPRC. They have enough members to do that. Others may just have, like you said, 5 or 6 people on the unified board, which would mean that by discipline, everybody would have to act as an SPRC member. And what you would do is, as we've said before, is you would handle SPRC members, SPRC issues separately from the unified board meeting. It can be done the same night. But you would have to have 2 sets of minutes and you would have to close the meeting. Board meetings are open to all members. They can come, they have voice, but no vote. But when you're handling SPRC matters, you would have to dismiss those board members, dismiss those members and just it be the board. And you would have to have a separate set of minutes because it is confidential and closed. So I think it's contextual. I mean, I had a unified board at a church where we had 5 people in each that served. We had 15 people on the unified, 16 people on the unified board, 5 in each area. And so we were able to meet together and then meet separately in our groups and then come back and do whatever voting we needed to do at the end of the meeting. But the SPRC met privately. And so that would be, it's contextual how you set up your unified board.
And there are some excellent Training Tuesday videos that you can go back.
I've read this a couple of times.
That some of our colleagues. So if you go to the Training Tuesday page, resources on both conferences, you can see all the previous Training Tuesdays. And there's several unified board webinars. And when I have a church that's looking at making that transition, I always really require that they've watched at least one of those before we move forward with making that transition.
And regardless of the conference you're located in, if you do go to the Baltimore-Washington conference, it's searchable. I haven't looked.
Yeah.
Always in on the Pendel if I can do that.
Can I just say one thing about what, when we were talking about cash flow issues that we didn't cover in the ABCs that I think is important to cover. And that is sometimes when you're setting the pastor's salary in a church, your love of a particular pastor can conflate the salary that you're able to actually afford. And then say that pastor gets moved and then you have set a salary that you can't truthfully provide. And so it is very important for you to be absolutely honest about what you can afford as a compensation for a pastor, because it is a contract that you're making with the pastor for a year, and you're saying to the district superintendent that this is what we can afford. And so you're making a contract with that pastor that you're going to provide this compensation. And we know things happen that are unexpected that can influence a budget and everything. But when you are, as the SPRC, when you are recommending the pastor's salary, do the absolute best you can to make sure that you are setting a salary that is manageable and sustainable for your church.
Thank you, Tina. You talked early in the beginning about relationships and really laid out the Matthew 18, 15 to 17 wonderfully. Somebody is asking, how is it different if a person uses an email to address their concern versus face-to-face?
Yeah, don't do that. I think we all know that. I've learned that the hard way. Honestly, one of the most significant conflicts I had with a member that the SPRC then had to get involved with was sending an email I shouldn't have sent. And that's a basic, we all experience that in our families and in our work settings, is that email allows us to respond too quickly. It prevents us from communicating with the full manner of voice and tone and physical bearing. It's difficult to sense things like sarcasm. And so we really want to encourage folks to have face-to-face conversations. If they can't, they're not able to meet in person, to do Zoom. Use the method that allows you to communicate in the fullest sense of communication. Email, it's certainly not text. Please don't text anything that requires more than a one-word answer. Just as a rule, just don't. But
email has no affect, and so it allows the reader to place whatever emotion and affect into it that they want. So often, you may write a simple sentence and to you it's benign, but someone else can read it and put affect into it that wasn't intended. I think it's okay to send an email to say, I would like to talk to you, and here's the things that I would like to discuss, without going into detail, so that you're giving the pastor, whoever you want to have a conversation with, an idea that you're going to be coming in and you're going to be talking about these things. Mm-hmm. And so even
a follow-up. Email can be a good way to do it. We had this meeting. These are the action steps we discussed. But yeah.
We're going to popcorn around. I've got 3 that I'm saving that are all kind of related, but we'll popcorn on the ones that come in. If you have a pastor who retires or is moved, and is the church committed to paying the new pastor the same salary as the outgoing pastor, particularly if the outgoing pastor has more experience?
So I think so. When you meet with the district superintendent, because there's going to be a change of pastor, a salary will be discussed. A salary will be discussed at that time about what is sustainable. What are you able to sustain the same salary? And what you're looking for in a pastor. And so the salary shouldn't necessarily be set based on the pastor, because you're offering the salary up front. And so it's not then designed. And the bishop and the district superintendents, we really do pray diligently and long and hard about the selection of a pastor for individual churches. Sometimes we get it right. A lot of times we get it right. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes, a relationship we thought was going to be great just doesn't work out. It's like life. Sometimes the best intentions fall through, but it shouldn't be salary based. So if your pastor is retiring at the end of June, if you're on my district, you'll be meeting with me in the next month. If you already don't have a meeting set up, you'll have one set up if I know your pastor's retiring, and we'll have those conversations about moving forward. What is the sustainability of the salary, and what are the qualities that you're looking for? What kind of pastor you would like to see come to move you forward, and to develop vital ministries with you.
And to emphasize what Tina has said, once you've had that conversation with the district superintendent and said, this is what we're able to pay, this is what the appropriate level for, what we think gifts and skills and experience and all of those things, we like that's the number. It's not, you don't meet the pastor and say, oh, but we'd like to change this. It really is then the discernment of the bishop and cabinet around who the appropriate fit is. And your there's a lot more conversation to have with your district superintendent about that, but you certainly should. The other thing, so one new piece, if you have a pastor who is retiring, and this is in both conferences or otherwise going to extension ministry, if you know and they know, there is a web-based form. This came out within the past few weeks that they need to fill out that triggers the formal conversations and approvals that they need for retirement. And so if you know that your pastor is going to be retiring, ask them, have you told, I've got several pastors that have been talking about retirement, but haven't given a final answer, and certainly have not filled out the form that they need to officially request retirement. And so if you're an SPRC and your pastor has decided, or you think, or for some reason that most pastors tell the DS first, but they need to fill that form out. That often with this new process will be what triggers us then being able to talk with them about a timeline and have clarity about when we start working with the SPRC.
Thank you, Sarah. Now, some best practice questions. What's the best practice for doing the evaluation or talking about pastor's performance? If the pastor's in the room, particularly if the pastor is new and that relationship hasn't been built yet.
So in Peninsula, Delaware, we encourage you to do the evaluation together as a committee. And so what that will look like, you can all sit down with the evaluation and do it together question by question. The committee can take the evaluation home and each individual member fill it out, and then you come in together and you compare. But we encourage you to do it together with the pastor. It should be a conversation. It should be a helpful tool to help the pastor to grow and to affirm what the pastor does well, but also talk about some growing edges in a loving and transparent way. We don't encourage that this be done outside of the presence of the pastor.
Do you have any suggestions or best practices or strategies for how the SPRC can help foster a positive church culture?
Well, I think some of our ABCs this evening hopefully help with that. I think turning to scripture, right? As United Methodist, we use our Wesleyan Quadrilateral as a tool, and scripture is the foundation of that. We've offered a couple of, I think, really key passages tonight. Matthew 18:15-17, how to handle if somebody has sinned against us. Some of the situations we're talking about, somebody didn't sin against us, right? I mean, we're kind of using that. That's, but as a guideline broadly for if somebody does something that you're upset about, talk to them, right? And I think fostering, and if you have a church where people have not been regularly doing it, that is a huge culture change, right? There are churches where it really takes some spiritually mature SPRC work to encourage folks to deal direct. Some people don't do this well in their personal life, and they're not going to magically be able to do this in the church. So walking alongside folks and again, affirming, doing that, looking at 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, love is kind, is not envious or boastful or rude. And so I think looking at scripture as foundational, modeling it as the SPRC. People will see the way that you as SPRC members speak to the pastor, interact with each other. And so building good relationships in the SPRC, amongst the SPRC and with the pastor will help to model that to the congregation. So those would be, those are, the encouraging folks to talk to somebody they have challenges with, modeling healthy communication and work. And the other thing is the answer to that may depend on how much work is needed in the congregation. You may need to turn to the district superintendent. There might need to be, in some situations, conflict mediation brought in. And so if you're struggling with specific situations, please know that you are not on your own, that your district superintendent is available, and we can help provide other resources to help support you. So please don't feel like you need to have all the answers or to be able to fix conflicts that happen. Please reach out and know that we are here to support you.
I think also when you have clear expectations, and the expectations have been clearly agreed upon between the pastor and the SPRC, then you have the opportunity when, for example, I served a church for within the covenant, visitation was not an expectation. And so when folks would complain that the pastor wasn't visiting enough, the SPRC would say that was not an expectation that we set for her. That was not what we asked her to do. We asked her to focus on these things. And so in these areas, she's doing exactly what we've asked her to do. And so I think in that way, you can put out some fires by stating what the clear expectations are, maybe even posting. These are the goals we set for the pastor this year, posting them on a bulletin board so that folks know what you've asked the pastor to work on. But also remembering, in all things, we're all human beings. No one is perfect. Your pastor is not perfect. Your pastor is going to make mistakes. And rather than mistakes being the fall of the pastor, how can mistakes be a growing and learning opportunity for everyone involved and an opportunity for grace and forgiveness? Now, certainly there are some very grievous things that can happen that I'm not asking you to overlook, but in just general everyday, like I couldn't say a word tonight. And so, for some people that would be awful, but for other people it was graceful and they laughed. And so remembering that we're all human, we have good days and bad days. And when your pastor is having a bad day or a struggle, that would be an opportunity for you, instead of coming down hard on the pastor, but maybe taking the pastor aside and saying, is everything okay? These are some things we're noticing. You seem a little off. Is there some way that we can help you? And then maybe sit down and put together some strategies for how you can work through this difficult time and come out stronger, and you have a stronger, better pastor because of it.
I like that. Thank you, Tina. Goes back to S, support. Someone needs a clarification, however, about evaluations again.
Okay.
Is it a good practice? And they call it, you don't have to answer this, Eric, because they specifically said Tina in there.
I'm so glad, Tina.
Please clarify pastor's evaluation. Is it good practice for the SPRC to meet without the pastor first to discuss the evaluation, then call the pastor in to discuss the entire committee's evaluation?
I'm not going to say it's good or bad. I think my preference would be that everybody should be able to have a conversation with everybody. So I would ask what the purpose would be that you would need to meet outside the presence of the pastor that couldn't be discussed in front of the pastor. Because your job is to be transparent and to be supportive and helpful. And this is supposed to be a tool to help the pastor grow and to affirm where the pastor is doing well and figure out where those growing edges are and how you can support them. And so I think that everybody should be able to have that conversation together. That's my preference. I certainly do know that some SPRCs do meet and sort of discuss it together before they meet with the pastor, because it's a comfort level. But I think the more we train ourselves to be comfortable with having these difficult conversations in love and understanding that we're all here to support each other and we want to help each other be the best that we can be, then those conversations can be held together.
Thank you. And we have time for the final question.
It's for Sarah.
Sure, Sarah. Do you have any best practices for how the SPRC can assist in developing leadership in the local church?
Well, I mean, I think an excellent place to start is by helping with the culture of the congregation and the way that people handle. The work that you invest in cultivating healthy relationship between the pastor, staff, and congregation will pay dividends in the ways that everybody interacts with each other. And so I think you can, support leadership development in that way. There are others in the church that are tasked with, looking at leadership development. A little while ago, years ago, the nominations committee was renamed as lay leadership, with the idea that committee ideally would do more than just meeting once or twice to put names on a slate for church conference and for leadership, but thinking about how can we really cultivate leadership within the congregation. And so, we don't want the SPRC doesn't necessarily have that specific work, but I do think that setting the culture of the congregation and especially really insisting and modeling that leaders are setting the example for how we expect people to interact with each other. And like that itself, I think, is a primary way that the SPRC can have a transformative, just working on that can be transformative to a congregation. And there are excellent tools and resources for the SPRC to help to model healthy interactions. Again, our Center for Clergy Excellence, Reverend Jack Shitama, does some excellent training around being a non-anxious leader. Would definitely recommend that training and those resources. There's family systems theory resources that can be excellent resources as well, some books and other trainings. But as the SPRC, really just helped me to model healthy communication and leadership and being a non-anxious presence, I think will have massive ripple effects throughout the leadership of the congregation.
And you gave me a wonderful segue. First of all, thank you both very much for taking the time to prepare for tonight and for being present tonight. We've had a lot of great comments. If you haven't had a chance to say thank you in the chat, please drop a thank you in the chat for our presenters. They've done an excellent job on a challenging subject. I know during my ministry, both my parents had different terms as SPRC chair at their local church and would call me, and I finally had to say, stop calling me about this. So it's wonderful to be able to handle that, and you do it so well. Thank you. For those wondering about leadership development, we are doing a training Tuesday on November 12th. We're taking off next week so everyone can go out and vote. We are going to be having a training Tuesday that I'm leading on November 12th called Your Church Does Not Need More Volunteers. It's specifically designed for nominations, but it can also be anybody who is looking for some leadership development. So you can sign up both from the Baltimore-Washington Conference webpage, the Peninsula Delaware webpage, and the Episcopal area webpage to find out how to register for that. So again, thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. We will post the recording and the handout, hopefully by week's end, about every website that we're responsible for, so you'll be able to find it. If not, I believe most of you have my email, and we'll get that information to you. So have a lovely evening and a great rest of your week, and we'll see you on November 12th.
Very good. God bless. We value you. Thank you for serving.
Yes, thank you.